When discussing the RPGs of the 4th generation of consoles that define the 16-bit era, a game that is frequently overlooked is Exile. Originally released in Japan as XCR2 Konketsuhen on the NEC PC-88, NEC PC-98, and the MSX2 in December of 1988. The game released as Exile in the West was actually the second game in the Exile series. Rather than receiving ports to this game, the Western console releases on the Turbo CD and the Genesis were remakes of this game, and while the basic story remains similar, some characters and even an entire section where the protagonist travels through time into the modern era were removed from this version of the game. Some details were changed in each of the console versions, such as changing the names of characters, factions, and towns, or some small variation to how the events in the story played out. It was released on the Turbo CD in 1992, developed by Telenet and published by Working Designs. The game mixes 2D top-down gameplay in the town sections typical of retro RPGs, with 2D side-scrolling sections in the dungeon areas. Traveling between areas is navigated on a map, where the player can select the location to travel to. Navigation is fairly easy in the game due to the simple interface, and the game is very linear in structure. The game takes place in the Middle East during the Crusades, and the protagonist of the game is Sadler, a member of the Order of Assassins who receives a message from the leader of the Templar Knights requesting his assistance in a plan to end the ongoing violence in the region. Sadler ends up gathering his party consisting of Rumi, a healer who also plays the role of Sadler's love interest, Fakil, a sorcerer, and Kindi, a strong man of few words. The party then heads off to meet with Yu Depain. Yu tells Sadler he has become disillusioned with the Crusades, which initially promised peace but instead only brought bloodshed. He tells of his plan to find the Holy Max, which is a powerful artifact that will bring about the creation of a god who will unite the world and bring peace and prosperity to all. Even though he's being sent on a quest to recover something that sounds like it was named after a mega church, Sadler agrees to help because he is also desperate to see this war come to an end. Fakil and Kindi stay behind to help guard the Hamish shrine from the Crusaders, and now Sadler, Rumi, and Yug head off to find the Holy Max. As a gift to aid him in his quest, Fakil gives Sadler an artifact that allows him to use magic. The main focus of the story in Exile is regarding this quest to find the Holy Max, and this takes Sadler to various parts of the world where they will be aided by fictionalized versions of historical figures such as the spirit of Mani, the founder of the religion of Manichaeism, Ninkan, a monk who founded an unorthodox sect of Buddhism known as Tachikawa Ryu, and Pythagoras, the founder of the Pythagorean school, which focused on mathematics, philosophy, and mysticism. Exile's gameplay alternates between searching for clues regarding the Holy Max and exploring dungeons to find items you need to activate it. While the dungeons tend to be relatively small, there is no map function, so this aspect of the game may be frustrating to some modern players. Enemies will spawn from certain points in dungeons when triggered by your proximity to them, so finding a spawn point with an enemy to take out that gives decent experience is a good way to grind. The TurboGrafx 16 controller has auto-fire options holding down the attack button, and Sadler will continue to attack if you hold down the button in the Genesis version. So you could easily wrap a rubber band around the controller and do something else while grinding. The gameplay is similar to Ys 3 Wanderers from Ys, where grinding is the first thing you will need to do so your stats will be high enough to face the upcoming bosses. Most of the bosses can be cheesed and go down quickly. Only the last three will put up much of a fight if you have attain the maximum level and have the best armor and weapons. As an early 16-bit game, the controls are somewhere in between the stiffness of 8-bit games and the more fluid controls of later 16-bit games. Exile looks fairly good for its time, with the dungeons and enemies you fight in them being visually interesting, and the animated cutscenes adding a nice touch. The music is kind of eccentric, and that some of it sounds fitting for an RPG of that era, but some of it has an early 90s dance music vibe to it that you might expect to hear in something like a Streets of Rage game. The voice acting in the game isn't as terrible as most Turbo CD games, but it also isn't up to the level working designs would later have, with later releases they would go on to have on the Sega CD. This version of Exile didn't receive much in the way of censorship. The only incident of which I am aware is that according to Victor Ireland of Working Designs, as quoted by the site Hardcore Gaming 101, NEC asked the name of the Christian Crusaders be changed to avoid religious controversy, so they were renamed Clispins. With the limited censorship and animated cutscenes, the Turbo CD release is probably the best way to go if you want to play Exile. The Genesis release of Exile was developed by Telenet and released in 1992. This version looks and plays similarly to the Turbo CD version of the game, but with colors adjusted to fit the Genesis color palette and with the cutscenes lacking animation. While the game doesn't have a CD soundtrack, the music sounds great on the Genesis soundtrack. Something that immediately sticks out if you have played other versions of the game is that Sadler is no longer a smoker, where in the other games he was portrayed as constantly having a cigarette. A major difference in this version is that many names of characters and locations have been changed to remove religious and historical references, with the Christian Crusaders being renamed the Luciel Forces, Nincon being renamed Jincon, Eleusis becomes Elsius, and the new dancers there are now clothed. Oddly enough, Pythagoras remains unchanged, maybe because a Western audience associated him more with mathematics than with religion or any controversial part of history. A few story changes were made in this version, such as a scene where Crusaders were seen executing people by burning them at the stake, and the player had to get the information from those who were still alive was removed from the game and replaced with finding a group of survivors who give you the needed information, and how the druids who kidnapped Rumi are replaced with the ghosts of sorcerers called the Katit. Whether you play the Turbo CD or Genesis version of Exile, you are in for a short but sweet experience, with the game being around 4 hours in length. While it doesn't have the polish of later RPGs from its console generation, there is still plenty to enjoy here. If Exile seems like it will appeal to you, then give it a try. It's only a small investment of time. It might be a gaming treasure buried beneath the sand that you were hoping to find.